continue to wait for the jury to reach its verdict in the criminal trial of Paul Manafort, that's President Trump's former campaign manager, even as the president's representatives continue to speak out on the Mueller investigation, with the latest news over the weekend that White House counsel Doug McGahn spent 30 hours being interviewed by the special counsel's investigators. For our legal update, we welcome now back to the program Seth Waxman, partner at Dixon & Wright in Washington, a seasoned criminal trial lawyer with 13 years experience as an assistant United States attorney in the District of Columbia. Welcome back, Seth. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So first, as a former prosecutor, give us a little window into how the prosecutors against Mr. Manafort are feeling right now. Is it surprising you that it's taking this long, given there are 18 counts on an awful lot of exhibits, and at what point would you get nervous?
So it wouldn't be surprising to me, sitting on the outside looking in, that we've gone through a couple of days of deliberations. I'll tell you, as a former federal prosecutor, every minute that goes by kind of makes your heart sink a little bit. You've convinced yourself as a prosecutor you've got the evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt. You've got the documents, you've got the text messages, the emails, the bank records. So as the days wear on, your heart sinks a little bit further each day. But, 2 full days of deliberations is not unusual given the gravity and the, various counts that are out there, and it could be the case that we have, a split jury 11-1, one way or the other. So you just never know as to where a jury sits.
So we're all trying to read the tea leaves, and one of the tea leaves we're reading is the request from the jury early on to have a redefinition of exactly what reasonable doubt meant. Does that bother you? Because isn't that pretty standard for a jury to say, I want to make sure exactly I understand what that is?
Yeah, I mean, that can be a standard question that comes up. It's not the kind of question prosecutors like to hear, that people are debating over reasonable doubt. You'd like to think that your case is just so strong, it'd be beyond any doubt. But, it is not an uncommon request. The judge's instruction in this way oftentimes isn't very helpful. It's something along the lines of a reasonable doubt is a doubt for which you can have a reason for, really not explaining a whole lot. But, the jury is going to, go through their workmanlike pattern of continuing their deliberations today. And I know everybody's going to be looking very intently.
What do you think about the performance of both the prosecutors and the defense lawyers? Because Rick Gates was a star witness, but we saw defense lawyers actually accusing him of stealing from Manafort for an extramarital affair. So how important is his credibility here?
Well, it's important. I know the defense is going to make it the be-all, end-all. The prosecution, as they point out, their star witness is not Rick Gates. It's the documents. They are looking to prove their case, the prosecution is, through the corroboration, through the other witnesses, through the emails, through the other independent evidence, and saying essentially that Rick Gates is the icing on the cake. The defense, on the other hand, wants to make it the be-all, end-all because they want to make it feel like to the jury it's a he said, and you just can't trust Rick Gates for all the reasons you brought up, like his credibility, like his extramarital affairs, and whatever else they've used to impeach his credibility.
We saw prosecutors also having a little bit of a hard time with Judge Ellis. Do you think that the jury will be thinking about that?
Juries take judges' comments very seriously, and so when a judge injects himself like this, it can have an impact. In my experience, as long as the judge doesn't cross the line of making the jury feel like the government's doing something underhanded or kind of playing not fair, that the jury will ultimately reach the conclusion they would have otherwise reached, whether or not a judge impacted or made comments. So I don't think it ever reached that level, and my feeling is that the jury will reach the appropriate impact or result, rather, based on the evidence. And the judge, while a bit of headline getting, won't have an ultimate impact on this matter.
Let's turn now to the Mueller investigation, and I thought remarkable news over the weekend that the White House counsel Doug McGahn sat for 30 hours, 30 hours, with the prosecutors to really give them information. And President Trump tweeted out, I think we can put it up, I allowed White House counsel Doug McGahn and all other requested members of the White House staff to fully cooperate with the special counsel. In addition, we readily gave over 1 million pages of documents, most transparent in history, no collusion, no obstruction, witch hunt. Well, this sounds very noble on the president's part. Is it smart? Is this standard operating procedure, particularly when it's your lawyer, for goodness sakes, you're asking to go in there?
Yeah, it looks like there's been a dramatic shift in strategy from the John Dowd time when he was counsel to the Sekulow Giuliani time frame that we're in now, whereas Mr. Dowd, maybe because his client was telling him there was nothing to worry about. There's no reason anyone in the White House can't speak to Mr. Mueller because I've done nothing wrong. And under that kind of mindset, Mr. Dowd said, well, look, let's let Mr. McGahn go in there and waive or not assert executive privilege or raise any other hurdles. Let's let them get their story out. It seems seems these days that Mr. Giuliani is taking a much more aggressive tactic, trying to kind of circle the wagons and constrain the amount of evidence Mr. Mueller is seeing. So, in hindsight's 2020, it may be the case that if Mr. McGahn shared some incriminating or damaging information to Mr. Trump, that maybe in hindsight, someone would have made a different decision 3 or 4 or 6 months ago.
Well, as I understand it, there was no other lawyer for President Trump in the room at the time. So does the president really know what Don McGahn had to say?
During his sessions with the Mueller team, you're saying there wasn't, right. That may be the case. And so, no, it doesn't seem likely that the president or Mr. Giuliani is getting a full debriefing of what Mr. McGahn said. I think Mr. Giuliani was on record this weekend saying essentially he got the gist of it, that he's a good witness for us. And even if he is a good witness for Mr. Trump in the sense that there are no incriminating conversations between the president and Mr. McGahn, I mean, Mr. McGahn could be offering up evidence against other individuals like his son or son-in-law, the president's. And, you start to tighten that noose. Prosecutors don't need it to be against the president himself. It can be people that are surrounding or very close to the president and then use those individuals as tools to then roll up on the president himself.
Talking about somebody close to the president, we're hearing media reports that there could be fraud charges against Michael Cohen on $20 million of loans. The president has worked with Mr. Cohen for a decade. How big of a blow could this be if this in fact comes through?
Yeah, anything that brings Mr. Cohen closer to cooperating and bringing him into the fold of Mr. Mueller could be very damaging to the president. There seems to be some disconnect here as to why Mr. Cohen, if he's not already cooperating, but why he's not cooperating at this point. It may be the case that people like Mr. Gates and Mr. Flynn, who really got sweetheart deals from the Mueller team, as I understand it, they are probation eligible, really great deals for those individuals. Maybe Mr. Cohen is looking for a similar type of get out of jail free card in a cooperation agreement, and maybe Mr. Mueller's team is just not willing to give him that great a benefit. So maybe that's the disconnect. It also may be that the prosecutors are just trying to hammer home to Mr. Cohen, look, we've got you dead to rights on all sorts of very serious charges, and so you better be truthful with us. You better cooperate fully. So there's some disconnect going on that we're not privy to as to why Mr. Cohen isn't in the fold yet. He's clearly made it clear through himself and Lanny Davis that he has an interest in cooperating.
Okay, Seth, thanks so much for being back with us today. That's Seth Waxman, former federal prosecutor, now at Dickinson Wright in Washington.